Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the third and final class in this series. We're going to be continuing along the lines of Kavod HaBeriyot, but we're going to be kind of veering sideways into the topic of what is our relationship with non-Jews. In other words, I think I've done a fairly convincing job of arguing that Kavod HaBeriyot as a Halakhic principle applies within Psak, in our communities, right? Among our family members, within our communities, that it's an important principle that it's been used over the centuries, often with pushback, meaning there's definitely a fear in the halachic discourse that it can be abused. And we know that it's been used in tshuvas having to do with women having aliyot. Really there it's more kvod tzibur, but Rabbi Sperber brought in as well the idea of kvod habriyot. It's been suggested, could we use it with something else to be inclusive or more tolerant, more compassionate toward LGBTQ members of our community? In other words, it has appeared, but not in the way the Ramah or Rav Ovadia use it, as like one of the central arguments, not the only argument, but one of the central arguments in poskening in complex situations. One pushback, and I can counter argue as well, both the Ramah and Rav Ovadia were talking about very specific situations. And so maybe that's what Rabbi Zera said, Gadol kvod habriyot shedochel lo taaseh b'Torah sha'a achat, right? Like we're talking about 1 hour. Can we apply it more broadly to a group of people, right? And that becomes one of these back and forths within the halachic community. And I would say really defines differences between a more liberal attitude and a more conservative attitude towards halacha. But Rav Lichtenstein, as I quoted, and I'll end with him in his really wonderful essay called Ma Enosh, he wonders whether we haven't been too cautious, right? That here is there's clear precedent to be using kvod habriyot, and the fear of it, that it will be misused, that it will be abused, has led essentially to non-use, to like a shutdown, to an ignoring of it as a halachic principle, with the exception, as we said, of Rav Ovadia, who comes in and just uses it, because Rav Ovadia had that kind of brevity, really courage, had that kind of confidence is really the right word. I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to start with the new material. The new material is going to be looking at our obligation towards non-Jews. And I think particularly, why is this not opening? Hold on. Oh, no, not what I wanted. It's a good thing that the screen for my college classes didn't come up, because there I have some very interesting drawings. Okay. Here we go. Great. My poor, your poor doesn't matter. So I think this is particularly of interest outside of Israel, although inside Israel as well, these questions come up, but particularly in communities, right, where there might be fundraising drives for the poor of the inner city. The church might do a fundraiser, not for the church, but for the homeless who come and take food and clothing. They run a soup kitchen. Do we have any sort of responsibility to help those in need who are not from within our community? And I would say Orthodoxy often excels in inward-facing chesed. We're very, very good with taking care of our own, really incredible chesed within communities constantly, but we're more resistant to outward facing, right, towards the greater world. And in the non-Orthodox world, I would say there's a little bit of an opposite effect, in the sense there's a lot of tikkun olam, outward facing interest in projects that are global, or tikkun olam, or let's look at the world, environmentalism, or homelessness, or poverty in Africa. And they don't have the same chesed structures that Orthodox communities kind of almost organically create. I'll just say a colleague, a friend really, Diana, oversees an organization that's real. It's called Olam, an organization, I think it was 160. It's an umbrella for like 160 organizations. They are all Jewish or Israeli, but Israeli Jewish. And they are all dealing with poverty and food scarcity mostly around the world. right? So you have all and part of what she does is she creates, I think they do some micro grants, but share a network where organizations can share resources and ideas and network and so on. I'm simplifying, but I always have her come and speak to my social justice class. None of them are Orthodox, right? Like for the most part, there are almost no Orthodox people. She herself is Orthodox, but she said like there's a very small group of Orthodox social justice activists, right? We're really good at chesed, not that they don't exist, and it could be some of you are those activists, and that's wonderful. I'm just talking more about something that's more pervasive, right? Like a macro look at where different Jewish communities position themselves. And she talked about, right? It's just very interesting that it's not that there are zero Orthodox people in these organizations, but none of them are run by really Orthodox people. It's not an Orthodox idea to solve poverty in Africa. So let's take a look at what our sources have to say. Hu haya omer. So Rabbi Akiva would say, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God. It is a sign of even greater love that it has been made known to him that he was created in the image. As it says, and I'll quote, Ki b'tselem Elokim asat ha'adam." So Rabbi Akiva would say, Chaviv Adam, he starts with Adam. Adam is Adam. Adam is universal. So he starts with Adam is beloved of God because all of Adam is created b'tselem Elokim. And then I'm going to switch to the Hebrew here. I'm over here. Chavivin Yisrael shenikru banim l'makom. So beloved are Israel. Rabbi Akiva now becomes particular. And he's interested, obviously, in the particular relationship of Bnei Yisrael with God. Shenikru banim l'makom. That they're called sons or children to God. Chiba yetera nodat lahem shenikru banim l'makom shene'amar Banim atem ladonai Elohechem. He quotes a pasuk where in Devarim it says, "You are children of the Lord your God." And then Chavivin Yisrael, and he continues with the particular, but he says something very important. Shenatan lahem kli chemda. He gives Bnei Yisrael a special gift, a precious article. Chiba yetera nodat lahem shenatan lahem kli chemda shebo nivra ha'olam. He gives them the precious article that through which the world was created. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, Torati al ta'azovu. Do not forsake the Torah. And to me, in that moment, he goes from our being, well, my precious children who I just want to hug and kiss and hold, to children for whom there's an expectation, right? And consequence and responsibility. That kli chemda, which is so precious, and it's the Torah, is not the kind of gift you unwrap and you say, hooray, and it's all for me all the time. Like it's just something I get to enjoy. Yes, I get to enjoy Torah. But with it comes incredible responsibility, incredible awareness of what our purpose in the world is. And what Rabbi Akiva suggests is we're not just chavivim in the simplistic way that parents love their children unconditionally. Because at the end of the day, we don't fully love our children unconditionally. We do, we love our children, and hopefully we love our children, whatever choices they make. But there are expectations in that relationship, and the expectations in the relationship with God, the responsibility in the relationship with God is the kli chemda, and Rabbi Akiva says, we're very lucky that God gave us that, because that will shape our lives. That will give us purpose. That will give us meaning. That will give us ethics. That will give us what to do from the moment we wake up till we go to sleep. That's a precious gift. And I can certainly say, looking around, one of the reasons the world has become so complicated for our children and our grandchildren, I only have one little baby grandchild, so I'm not there yet, is that life has gotten in many ways very, very easy. When I would say my grandmother was a young married woman, there were not yet washing machines, right? The pre-washing machine, pre-freezer, pre-refrigerator, pre-electric oven, right? Like it's not that long ago. Probably less than, what are we, 19, we're 2025. If I'm not mistaken, it's after World War II that there's an enormous shift and housewives suddenly find themselves with much less to do and become bored, right? Feminism really comes out of this whole, the housewife suddenly has much less work and the husband only wants to pamper her and buy her the latest thing. Our children today are facing an even worse crisis. Everything is at their fingertips. Everything is digital. You don't even need to go to the library to look up encyclopedias like that. All of us can relate to that. That Sisyphean work of what it was like to write a paper. And if you had a typewriter, maybe you typed it, and a lot of times you wrote it by hand. Like life has gotten easier, and many things are good about that. But there's also a danger of a nihilism, of like nothing means anything. That's a shiur for another time. The Kli Chemda says to us, oh no, there are still myriad responsibilities and actions that you have to take every day. I don't care how technologically savvy the world has become. You wake up every day and you embark on Avodat Hashem, right? That's the precious article. That no matter where we are in history, no matter how wealthy we are, no matter how many servants we have, there will always be the Torah that makes demands of us, and that will make, hopefully, our lives more meaningful. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the first source. I love that source. I now want to go in a slightly different, we're going back to the idea of human dignity, and let's see Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. How can we not bring him? Protecting dignity and avoiding humiliation was a systematic element of rabbinical law. So, for example, the rabbis ruled that even the richest should be buried plainly, so as not to shame the poor. On certain festive days, girls, especially those from wealthy families, had to wear borrowed clothes so as not to shame those who do not have. Now, this was like so crucial. What was happening in the time of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is that it became so costly to bury the dead because the wealthy would bury in these very elaborate shrouds that were expensive. And poor people would just leave the corpses because they were too ashamed to bury them in reeds, in like simple matting. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and said, every shroud is going to be the same. It's going to be from a very plain material that everyone can afford, or the tzedakah can be given, but we don't want to shame the poor. And so in death, we're all the same, right? If we even think about the plain wooden box, that was a statement, right? In Israel, of course, you don't have that. You're buried right into the ground. But, I've read articles and sometimes in a story, a novel, the cost of burial where you have to choose between a marble coffin or like very elaborate burials expensive. Even our burials are expensive. But certainly if you start adding to that other materials, it's prohibitive. And then on certain festive days, I love this, the girls from wealthy families would change clothes with the girls from poor families so as not to shame those who do not have, right? The idea was you would go dancing out to the vineyards to try to find a chatan on Tu B'Av and on Yom Kippur. And the girls would switch, they would all wear white, but they would swap clothing so that it wouldn't be obvious who was wealthy and who was poor. And this was very deliberate. The rabbis intervened to lower the prices of religious necessities so that no one would be excluded from communal celebrations. They did it with the spices for charoset, they do it with hadassim. Work conditions had to be such that employees were treated with basic respect. Here, the proof text was God's declaration, "For to me, the children of Israel are servants," meaning that they were not to be treated as servants of any human being. Freedom presupposes self-respect, and a free society will therefore be one that robs no one of that basic human entitlement. Now, we don't have a lot of time because it takes a while to go through the sources. I'm going to leave you with some questions that if you want to drop into the chat, I will take time to read. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? It's a really profound question and one we almost take for granted, right? It's a beautiful idea, such a beautiful idea. But why does the Torah describe that? Like, what is that meant to do for us? What does it mean to see that image of God and other human beings who are different from you? Rabbi Akiva says, all Adam are B'Tselem Elokim. That has nothing to do with being B'nai Yisrael. And I would say, finally, can you define human dignity or what the lack of human dignity looks like? That we've actually spent time on. You don't need to answer number 3, but if you have thoughts about number 1 and 2 and how that might help direct you, I'm going to leave that. Okay, charity begins at home. So we're going to start with something in Baba Batra. Tanu Rabbanan. Kupat shel tzedakah nigbeit b'shnayim, Umitchaleket bishlosha. So the rabbis say this is a baraita. It's an early rabbinic text parallel to the Mishnah, but not in the Mishnah. That the charity fund is collected by two people and distributed by three. And the Gemara will try to explain why. Well, we could probably come up with some reasons. Nigbeit b'shnayim she'en osin srarot al tzipor pachot me'shnayim. So it's collected with two, says the Gemara, because you don't confer authority unless there are two of you. One person coming and saying, give me money, never going to happen. But if two people come, then already they're representing the community. I'm going to say, I think transparency is a really good thing, right? Like one person collecting money, it's a little fishy, but two people, then yes, obviously both of them could be pocketing the money, but hopefully if they seem to be respectable, they're also guarding one another. Umitchaleket bishlosha, why is it divided up with three? Dine mamonot, it's a little like the laws of mamonot, of money, that really you try in a beit din of three money cases. And so this idea that we're trying to create a framework of transparency, of protocol, something. So it's not just chaplap, as we say, like there has to be order. Shegvuya v'chaluka shavim. Okay, so which are collected and then distributed equally. Okay. Tamchoi b'chol yom. Now, this is where I want to get into this, and I want to talk about the tamchoi. The tamchoi is collected every day. The tamchoi is the soup kitchen. Kupa me'erev Shabbat l'erev Shabbat. So the tamchoi is every day. We're talking about a soup kitchen, and you can imagine there were people at the end of the day who might have gone around asking for extra food. Do people have extra potatoes, extra onions? There's no refrigeration. So it makes sense if there's something left over, it could be collected and recycled fairly quickly. The kupa is money. You're not going to come to people's house and collect money every day. It's not fair. It's an unreasonable burden. People are not going to respond. But once a week, may Erev Shabbat, l'Erev Shabbat, go into Shabbat giving a little tzedakah. Tamchoi la'aniyei olam. The soup kitchen is for the poor of the world. Let all who are halach ma'anya. Let all who are hungry come and eat. The tamchoi in Jewish community is open to whoever wanders into the tamchoi. But the kupa, the money, is la'aniyei ha'ir. And I think it's very important because the distinction between a soup kitchen, which is food, and food can be stretched. We all know that. We all have the experience of more people show up than we think, and you begin to cut the food, like in the serving, you might have had barekas, suddenly you cut them in half. Or that someone calls Friday and you already made your soup, you throw in 2 more potatoes and a flegel, right? Like we know the ways, even if it's late, to extend, even if we don't have very much, to throw in a handful of barley, right? Barley thickens the soup. So there are things we can do to always make sure there's enough food. Money is very finite. Whatever there is, and we have to protect our financial resources. And we're going to see that play out when we start talking about giving to the poor. Okay, and then we say the B'nai Ha'ir can do a kupa tamchoi kupa, lishnota l'kol ma sheyirtzu. This is a very important idea that the B'nai Ha'ir ultimately can decide to change the norms. In other words, if they want to open the kupa to everybody and keep the soup kitchen just for the locals, or they want to collect money every day and food once a week, like the Gemara gives them some license to decide how they want to conduct themselves. And I think, that's very, very important. Okay, we're going to get to the Mishnah Torah. If you sit in a country, really a city, for 30 days, kofino totally tain staka ala kupa in Bnei Medina. If you already live somewhere for 1 month, you have to begin contributing to the monetary tzedakah. Or you have to give tzedakah to the kupa. Yashav sham shlosha chodashim kofino totally tain tamchoi. 3 months you begin to give to the soup kitchen. Yashav sham shisha chodashim kofino totally tain tzedakah biksut shemechasin ba b'nei ha'ir. I hope you're beginning to see similarity to what we talked about when we talked about Kavod HaBeriyot. After 6 months, you begin to contribute to a fund of clothing for the poor so that they're clothed. Yashav sham tisha chodashim kofino tolitein staka likvura shekovrin ba'ataniyin v'osin lahem kol tzarchei kfura. So two out of the three things we've been talking about the last 3 weeks, nakedness and death, appear on this list essentially. Once you're in a city for 6 months, you begin to make sure the poor are clothed. 9 months, you begin to contribute to their burial. Essentially, what we have here is you give a little tzedakah, you add to that food, you add to that clothing, you add to that burial supplies. In other words, these are all basic services that a Jewish community is expected to provide to all who are in need. Right? That's it's in Mishnah Torah Matanot LaEvyonim. This becomes a question, again, something to think about. I have these directed questions from a class I gave, a class where I had time for chavruta, which we don't have time, unfortunately. What is the difference between a soup kitchen and a charity fund in terms of communal resources? I think we answered that. Food could be stretched, money runs out. Should we be able to force people of means to give charity? What might that look like? That I'm actually going to pause and open up before we go on. Why does the Talmud need to give guidelines as who collects and gives out charity? What are some of the parallels today? So I'm going to pause. I do want to open up. I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes if you want to unmute yourselves. How do we incentivize people to give in your communities? What are some of the incentives that are meant to encourage those who have to give? Anyone? Any thoughts? What do your communities do?
Communal recognition, for one thing.
Okay, beautiful. Turns out communal recognition is pretty important, and it's not new. They used to have, what was it called? The, on Yom Kippur, the appeal.
Yep.
I don't really do that anymore. I don't think the appeal is really done. But they would have an appeal, and what would they do? There was one person who, or at least one, who was positioned, one of the wealthier members, who would get up, I'm giving this amount to the synagogue, and kind of look around and make it clear that like he was watching who was going to be giving. And sometimes a bidding war would break out, right? Sometimes they would put little things on your seat with the little pledges you can put down, and they knew where your seat was because it was assigned. Like recognition, and I'm going to go even further, that people then are aware of whether you give or don't give. In other words, when it's public, we now know who gave and who didn't give to the synagogue, to the mikvah, to the soup kitchen. And that creates some sort of shame, like we're going to guilt you a little bit, maybe even shame you a little bit. Shame on you, right? Like we all just gave and we're all sitting and just looking at you and the appeal's not ending. So there's both calling out in a positive way, and there's also the community putting pressure in a less positive way to those who don't give. Anyone else have seen anything?
Special receptions.
Special receptions, yeah, special receptions. There's now a new kind of approach, charity, where you get people to give, like it's this joint. It used to be the call-a-thon, the phone-a-thon, but now because it's digital, you see on social media, right? Everyone can see on the screen. This one gave $5 and $10 and $100 and $1,000, but you see the names and you see it's like you said, the recognition. And this one gave, and now I'm going to call my friend because that one gave. I like what you just said, Herb. School uniforms make all equal. That's true. The Tzelem Elokim only being to Jews, I don't believe is it goes against Bereshit. I mean, like that's just not Barao to B'Tzelem Elokim Barao Tam Zachar Nekeva. That would be a very particularistic reading of that. That would be disturbing to me, and that would be this very inward-facing idea that we're the only ones who are in the image of God. In my opinion, it goes against the Torah, and certainly Rabbi Akiva would not agree. Hold on one second. Interesting. Thank you, Larry. What a beautiful story that you put it in the chat, but that your father gave generously and he gave anonymously, and the rabbi asked that it become public so that the doctor, the wealthier earners could see what a public school teacher gave. Again, not sometimes it's shame, but sometimes it's also just like a moment of, oh, if he's giving that much, I need to up my bid. It's not even from a plate, right? It's like, oh, I didn't think about giving that much, but oh my God, if someone said, wow, that's really a beautiful story. Thank you. I'm going to go back to the sources, but these are questions every institution grapples with. I know I just came off of a TVA charity day. You kind of dread it because no one enjoys doing a fundraiser. And I'm always amazed at how well it works. And also, I recognize there's no choice. Every institution needs to figure out how to fundraise. Some do it through foundations and grants, but a lot have to do it within their communities. And then how do you encourage people, right? And so we see this idea of Rambam comes along and says, if you live in a community, your responsibility becomes to make sure the people in your community are provided for. Okay, so that's not even talking about like the shul and the school. That's talking about like the poor. Okay, we're gonna go on because we need to get to my poor, your poor. Ditane Rav Yosef, im kesef tilavet ami et ha'ani imcha, from Shmot, if you lend my people money, even the poor with you, ami v'nochri ami kodem. So if it's this is the Gemara, right? This is a classic Talmudic analysis. It says et ami et ani amecha, right? Tilavet ami et ha'ani imcha, sorry, et ani imcha. And so if it's an ami or a nochri, your ami comes first. Ani va'ashir, ani kodem. If a rich person comes to you and needs a loan, and there's a poor person who needs food, then the ani is kodem. Aniech va'aniyeh irech, aniech kodmim. If it's you're rich, you're poor, sorry, those around your family, let's say, your immediate community or immediate family comes before the city. Aniyeh irech va'aniyeh iracheret, aniyeh irech kodmim. And so this idea that your poor come first. Okay, and so we're going to see in a moment that the Aruch HaShulchan is going to come along and question that principle. So just wait. The master says, is that not obvious that your people come first? Rabbi Nachman answers, Huna told me it means that even if the money is being lent to a stranger, meaning a non-Jew with interest, because I could lend with interest, and to an Israelite without, you should lend without the interest. Okay, right? Like your poor come first, and that makes sense. We all have to make decisions about how we're giving. And first and foremost comes the institutions, the organizations, the people who are closest to us, but that doesn't mean that's where it ends. The Aruch HaShulchan then says, V'chelek gadol mehatzdaka yitain lekrovav va'aniyeiro. Absolutely. A big part of his tzedakah he should give to his family and he should give to the people of his town. Uma'at mechuyav litain gam l'rechokim va'aniyeh yir acheret. And some he should leave over for those who are far and for the poor of another city. De'im lo kach ir shel aniyim yigavu b'ra'av. There might be a city where there's no one to give, a city of poor people, and you're like, look, I gave in my community, I don't have anything else. He says there's a possibility that you who can give are an anomaly, like they're going to die of hunger, chas v'shalom. Elavadai kamosha katu kamosha katavti v'teda lecha shekenu de'im lo kach eze gvul titein leparnasato shi kodemet v'kol echad yomar ani nitzrach leparnasati kol ma shani marviach hari she'ein gvul lehotza'ah, and so on. Biyadua ela. So he basically says the problem is going to be that if you are there's no boundary to what people think they need. And if you give this one for his parnasah, who comes first, everyone will say, wait, I need more. I need this for my parnasah. I need this for my parnasah. There's no gvul lahatzah ki yadua. Elavadai kamosha katavti d'lo kai rak al misha yesh lo rak lecha mitzumtzam la'achyot nafsho v'nefesh ishto v'anav v'notav ha'ktamim. You should not only, he basically talks about those that rak al misha yesh lo rak lecha mitzumtzam la'achyot nafsho. So it's not enough to focus on you should not only focus, right? Like the idea is those around you who have lechem mitzumtzam to eat, once you start giving them, there's no end to what they're going to need. That's basically what end to his wife and to his small children. Delo kai rak al misha yesh lo rak lechem. You can't only get swallowed in, right? He basically writes, and I think this guy, even the richest individual is surrounded by so many needy family members. That part got cut off. I don't know why. There will be nothing left. He's like, look, you're going to get sucked dry, right? You can't only focus on someone who only has a little bit of bread and whatever. You give them. But if you start giving them, there's not going to be an end to what you have to give them to sustain them. So you make sure they have, but you also have to worry about those poor in a further city who aren't even going to have the bread. That's essentially what he's saying. And I think, this is where he takes what the Bavli is saying and he's saying, look, The Bavli is very important. Obviously, your poor come first, but you cannot ignore the distant poor. You just can't do it. And he's living at a time, of course, of terrible poverty. He's in Belarus, and it's the 19th century. Everyone's very poor, and there are cities who don't have any gvirs, who don't have any middle class. Right? Everyone's poor, and it becomes the responsibility of another city to make sure they're provided for. Okay, now we're up to the part that I promised you, and I'm only halfway into this year. I got there. And a stranger shall you not oppress, for you know the heart of the stranger, seeing you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, you have to be aware of the ger. You shall have one manner of law for the ger and for the ezrach, for I am the Lord your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem. So the Orach Chaim says, I didn't want to read the whole thing. Here it is. This is important. The Orach Chaim, fine. V'nireh lo al pi hakdama hayadua ki neshamot b'nei Yisrael heim shoresh hakdusha b'nei Avram Yitzchak v'Yakov chevel nachlato. It's a very beautiful opening. The neshamot of b'nei Yisrael are the root of the kedusha. The children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Chevel nachlato are the inheritance of Yitbarach, of God. V'kol zulatam heim chelek. Ra doesn't make sense there. V'lazer lo yakpidu b'zilzul adam she'eno mehem. Uva'onato litzad sheyachshavu shepachotu me'adiragot hakdosha. Umizeh yolid anfei ha'ona'ah. He basically has a line here is, you may not use the idea that the neshamot of Bnei Yisrael, and so maybe this is the answer, are shoresh hakdusha, to be mizalzel adam that are not of Bnei Yisrael, and to rob them, and to cheat them, and to mistreat them, because you think, well, they're pachot, they're less holy. That's what he writes, right? He writes this in Shemot. I think it's such a powerful statement, because he understands what happens when we elevate ourselves, and we should have high standards we strive to meet in our relationship with one another and with God. Halavai, that's what it should be about. But instead, it sometimes leads to a zilzul or a denigration of those who are not from us. And so he says, Lo yakpidu bizilzul adam she'eno mehem, uva'an onaoto, that you should think they're pachot. And then comes anfei ona. I found this to be a very powerful statement, and this idea that yes, Nishamot Yisrael might have an extra kedusha. We were given the Torah, but that doesn't mean that we have the right to look down on others and mistreat others. Rabbi Sachs, hatred of the foreigner is the oldest of passions, going back to tribalism and the prehistory of civilization. The pages of history are stained with blood in the name of racial or ethnic conflict. Dislike of the unlike is as old as mankind. The Torah asks, why should you not hate the stranger? Because you once stood where he stands now. You know the heart of the stranger because you were once a stranger in the land of Egypt. If you are human, so is he. If he is less than human, so are you. So I think that fits very well with the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim is writing a commentary on Shemot. Now we're going to get to, what about giving to non-Jews? And now we're going to get to the Bavli Yerushalmi. Okay. Tane was taught. Ir sheyesh bo goyim v'Yisrael ma'amidim gabai goyim v'gabai goyim v'gabai Yisrael. So in a city in which there are non-Jews and Jews, you, the Jews, you appoint collectors from the non-Jews and collectors from the Jews. It's very important. We don't have to collect money from non-Jews, but we have to make darn well sure they're collecting money for their poor. And this to me is umafarnesin aniyei goyim v'aniyei Yisrael. So before we get to the second half, which is much more personal, we have a responsibility to make sure that they're collecting, right? You appoint non-Jewish collectors, and essentially you don't do the collecting, but you make sure their collectors are collecting. So their poor are supported and your poor are supported. In other words, when it comes to money, money's finite. So it's not clear we have to give money, but if they're not collecting for their poor, we might have to. So you better make sure the local churches and mosques have collection funds, because that's your responsibility, to make sure the poor of the non-Jews are being collected for. Umivakrin cholei goyim v'cholei Yisrael. Again, very powerful. You have to visit the sick non-Jews and the sick Jews. The kovrin matei goyim matei Yisrael, and you actually have to bury the poor non-Jews, the non-Jews and the Jews. When they die, we're all the same, right? When we're dead, we're all the same. And so we have here illness, which is a very common, right? It connects human beings, the suffering, the pain, the difficulty. You have to see their suffering and you have to visit them. You have to help bury them if they need burial. Minachamim avlei goyim v'avlei Yisrael. You also go comfort them. Mechabsim klei goyim uklei Yisrael mimnei darchei shalom. And you make sure their clothing is laundered. Right? These are such basic things. We talked about the foundation of Kavod HaBeriyot, which is not a particularly Jewish idea. Briot is really creatures, right? The human dignity is the best translation we can get to. This idea that we make sure they're buried and that and we can comfort them and we visit their sick and we make sure they're clothed, they have clothing. Mimnei darchei shalom, ways of peace. And I want to just contrast. Some people will say, oh, well, that's so they don't hate us. No, we have a different term for them not hating us. It's called eva. When we want to say so that they don't hate us, we say mipnei eva. So for hatred, for fear of hatred. This is a positive term because of darchei shalom. If we want to get along with people who live in our vicinity, who are not from within our communities, we need to see the human aspect to their lives. And you see that when you see people who are poor, when you see them ill, when you see them mourning the way you mourn, their losses are not dissimilar to your loss. When you see them clothed the way you're clothed, or when they're unclothed and undignified, you wince because you recognize what indignity is. Now, the Bavli is going to go in the same direction, and so is the Rambam. This is not just the Yerushalmi. The Bavli is going to add a little bit. Ein memachin biyad aniyei nochrim beleket b'shikcha uvepea mimnei darchei shalom. So we know that there's a law that you have to leave gleanings, right? We're approaching Shavuot, so this is appropriate. This is like thematic. You don't protest against poor Gentiles, the aniyei nochrim, who come to take gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and the produce in the corner of the field, which is given to the poor. Now, that's very interesting because it's very clear they're just for the Jewish poor. Devarim is pretty clear about that. And in Gittin, in the Bavli, it's do not just like your tamchui is aniyei olam, this mitzvah, which is your klei chemda, right? It's that special gift God gave you, and it's about your poor. If poor nochrim come, you do not kick them off. You do not shoo them away. You let them collect. And we see with Ruth, right? Boaz actually has to call them aside and say, leave her alone. Because you have a Moabite collecting the gleanings. And she begins to be harassed by the men. And he says, leave her alone, right? And so Gittin comes and says, no, you allow them to take gleanings. If they need gleanings, you give that to them. Tanu Rabbanan, and now a Braita, Mefarnesim aniyei nochrim im aniyei Yisrael. Here it doesn't even do, at least the Yerushalmi says, let them appoint their own collectors. No, you have to support the poor Gentiles with the poor Jews, umivakrim cholei gvarim nochrim im cholei Yisrael, and you visit the poor nochrim, the non-Jews with the Jews, the kovrim mitei nochrim and mitei Yisrael mimnei darchei shalom. Same law, right? Bavli Yerushalmi are aligned in this. The added piece is about the leket shikren peah, which is interesting because really those are halachot that are really very inward facing, and they say no, those can be outward facing as well. The Rambam. Matanot avionim mefarnesim umechasim aniyei goyim im aniyei Yisrael mipnei darchei shalom. Right? So what is this darchei shalom? It's very amorphous in the same way Kavod HaBeriyot is. That's why no one likes to talk about it. I would say the most modern approach, and certainly in the more yeshivish world, is to say, oh, so they don't hate us. It's not real. We don't really have to give. But if they'll hate us, then we have to give, right? Like only for they're missing something very profound about what I believe the Talmud is demanding of us, what Rambam is demanding of us. And I believe that they're demanding, despite years of enmity, despite difference, we still have to see the human, the Tzelem Elokim, right? The idea that these people with their human bodies are human. And if we can't see them as human, then we're missing. We're missing something very core to our existence. What does the Aruch HaShulchan say? Kol haposhet yad litol lechem notnim lo. Va'afilu ba oved kochavim levakesh lechem notnim lo. The Aruch HaShulchan says, anyone who puts out his hand for bread, you give him. Even if it's an oved kochavim, says the Aruch HaShulchan. Even if he's an idolater, even if he's that far from you, he worships another god, you give him bread. V'kach amru chachamenu mefarnesim aniyei akum im aniyei Yisrael mimnei darchei shalom. Right, there are different girsaot. A lot of times the word akum, which means ovdei elilim, is short for ovdei kochavim, gets changed to goyim because idolaters are in a category of like a special category. But he says even if they're akum. V'lav dafka imaniyei Yisrael dafilu ba'levado. Not only if the beggar, the Gentile beggar, comes with the Jewish beggar, where it certainly wouldn't be nice to only give the Jew. We can understand maybe that would be eva, right? He says no. Even if he comes alone, ba'levado litol notnin lo she'ino rotze beheter klal. V'zehu v'adai lahachis v'zehu lo shchiach bichlal v'Hashem yirachem. And he basically says, even if he comes alone, you give him v'zehu v'adai laha. To not give him would be lahachis, and he says it's very unusual that that's going to happen. Hashem yirachem, right? Like okay, but you should give him. So I want to now move. So one of the questions I ask here is what is darchei shalom? If anyone wants to think about that, here we have another shalom Elokim, Kavod HaBeriyot, darchei shalom. Right, these are nice buzzwords for today, but obviously they're being used very profoundly in our Jewish texts. Why is it difficult for us to care deeply for those outside our communities, families, orbits? It is difficult because we only have so much bandwidth, right? On the other hand, when we don't see the suffering of other, right, it's very easy to dehumanize them, to not see them as fully human, and that becomes deeply problematic. Let's take a look at this story. It's a great story. I don't always have time to teach it. Today I do, and then I have a few sources to wrap up. Kohelet Rabbah. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua was walking on the rocks by the sea when he saw a ship being tossed about in the water, and in the blink of an eye sink together with all on board. He noticed a man sitting on a plank of the ship, carried from wave to wave until he was carried ashore naked. He hid himself among the rocks by the sea. So here we have a man unclothed, right? Human dignity, indignity, and he's hiding in the rocks because he's ashamed. It happened to be the season of the Israelite pilgrimage ascent to Jerusalem. So this is supposed to be Elazar ben Shamua is actually an early sage. It's possible that he lived. I don't remember if he lived during Bayit Sheni, but the idea is this is still late Bayit Sheni. He said to them, I belong to the descendants of Esav, your brother. Give me a little clothing wherewith to cover my nakedness, because the sea stripped me bare, and nothing was saved with me. So he calls out to the pilgrims as he's hiding behind the rocks, saying, can you give me a garment, a loincloth, something I can cover my nakedness with? And they retorted, so may all your people be stripped bare. As soon as he says he's a descendant of Esav, right? It's the time of the Romans. They're not very sympathetic. They don't really care. They're like, yeah, God should do this to all of you. He raised his eyes and saw Rabbi Elazar. Now, I think it's interesting, by the way, that the story is about, certainly by Kohelet Rabbah, which would have been probably somewhere between 600 and 800 CE. I don't remember exactly when. The author of Kohelet Rabbah certainly knows the Romans destroyed our temple. So, and also the idea that they're descendants of Esav. So it's very deliberate that this man is an enemy, right? Like an enemy in the sense, historically an enemy. And Esav at this point in the Midrash is reviled and has been, in the stories has become the bad guy. So you're talking about someone who has been very much othered, but in a very classic way, right? He's Esav, he's wicked, his descendants have oppressed us, Romans, whatever it is. And so they are delighted. They feel, yeah, let this happen to more and more of you. I think that's very important. It's an important part of the story. They do not see his humanness. They only see his otherness, and they want nothing to do with him. He saw Rabbi Elazar, who was walking among them. He claimed, I observe that you are an old and respected man of your people, and you know the dignity due to your fellow creatures. Favor me and give me a garment wherewith to cover my nakedness, because the sea stripped me bare. He now appeals directly to Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua was wearing 7 robes. That's supposed to be a sign of his greatness, right? 7 days of the week, 7 robes. He took one off and gave it to him. He led him to his house, provided him with food and drink, gave him 200 dinar, drove him 14 Persian miles, and treated him with great honor until he brought him to his home. So Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua implements the kind of hachnasat orchim Avram Avinu would implement, and goes above and beyond and gives him off his back one of his robes and drives him home, feeds him and drives him home. It's a beautiful, beautiful story about hachnasat orchim after he's been treated very badly by other Jews. Sometime later, the wicked emperor died, and they appointed this man king in his stead. Again, it's a great story. And he decreed concerning that province that all the men were to be killed and all the women taken as spoil. Now, this really is about Ava, right? This really is about revenge and about hatred. He has not forgotten. We don't know how long, was it 5 minutes? Was it 15 minutes? But all I'll say is anyone who's, hopefully it's never happened to anyone, but anyone who's ever been naked or afraid that someone has seen them naked or has been stuck in a situation where someone needs to bring them clothes and the fear that everyone's going to see, it doesn't matter if it's a minute or an hour, it's endless, right? He has not forgotten that degree of humiliation, of vulnerability, of suffering. And he is ready, now that he has power, to unleash that on this province. They said to Rabbi Elazar bar Shemua, go and intercede for us. He told them, you know, this government does nothing without being paid. They said to him, here are 4,000 dinar, take them and go and intercede. They're desperate, right? They collect all the money they have, which, by the way, might suggest they were a wealthy province, which makes their misbehavior even worse. He took them and went and stood by the gate of the royal palace. He said to the guards, go tell the king that a Jew is standing at the gate and wishes to greet the king. The king ordered him to be brought in. On beholding him, the king descended from his throne and prostrated himself before him. He asked him, what is my master's business here, and why is my master troubled to come here? He replied that you have mercy upon this province and annul this decree. It's a great tale. It really is. It's a little bit like a fairy tale, right? Like that the king gets down and bows before this old man, like this Jewish old man, what's going on? The king asked him, is there any falsehood written in the Torah? No was the reply. And he said to him, now we go back to the Kli Chemda we started with. Is it not written in your Torah, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter in the assembly of the Lord? What is the reason? Because they met you not with bread and water in the way. It is also written, you shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. And am I not a descendant of Esav, your brother? But they, the province, did not treat me with kindness. And whoever transgresses the Torah incurs the penalty of death. I know your Torah. It's not exactly accurate for these two sins, but still. He says they behaved like Ammonites and Moabites. They should be punished. And there's a mitzvah to treat an Edomite like your brother. He's using the Torah. He knows the Torah. And he knows that they did not use their Kli Chemda the way God intended. And he says to Rabbi Elazar, and I'm going to punish them. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua replied to him, although they are guilty towards you, forgive them and have mercy upon them. He said to him, you know this government doesn't do anything without being paid. It's not even me. He told him, I have with me 4,000 dinar. Take them and have mercy upon the people. He said, these 4,000 dinar are presented to you in exchange for the 200 which you gave me, and the whole province will be spared for your sake in return for the food and drink with which you provided me. Go also into my treasury, take 70 robes of honor in return for the robe you gave me, and go in peace to your people whom I forgive for your sake. They applied him to the stake, shlach lachmacha al hamayim, cast your bread upon the waters. You don't know where it will land, right? It's actually a very beautiful story. And it's a very beautiful story about the responsibility and consequence of this Kli Chemda, right? It's not just, oh yeah, we love the Torah, hey, yeah, the Torah, it's great, and we're Jews, and we have a Nechama Torah, and so on. In a moment of truth, they fail. They fail, and he catches them. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, luckily, stands, of course, he's the hero. And he stands upright, and he has the integrity, and he reflects what it means to be the Tzelem Elokim with the Neshama Kedosha of Yisrael, who doesn't just, live by, oh yeah, the Torah, but who really is the Torah, right? He personifies what the Torah expects of us, what it asks of us. So I think it's a very, he brings peace, of course. The darchei shalom is because he clothed him, he fed him, he drove him, he did all those things that you do for someone who's he sees the human vulnerability of this person. And he's repaid, of course, 70-fold and so on. The story has this wonderful ending. We have a few more sources, not many. Rabbi Unterman has a beautiful quote in Shevet MiYehuda. I'll read it in the Hebrew, which is his shoot. Rav Unterman was the chief rabbi of, I think he was the chief rabbi of Israel, certainly of Jerusalem, but I think he was the chief rabbi of Israel in the 1970s. But he was from London, and he was a rav in London. בזמן האחרון נשמעו לדאבוננו דברי חתירה תחת ערכי המוסר של היהדות התורתית, ובמיוחד נגד השקפת התורה על גוי ואדם, שכאילו אין יחס ראוי מצד ההלכה לנוכרים. He says, lately, and he says, the da'avonenu, to our deep despair, he says, it has become customary to see words of chatira, like undermining words, that undermine values of musar, of the Yahadut, especially neged hashkafat haTorah al goy v'adam, like that go against, the English is not an exact translation, that's why I brought the Hebrew, against the hashkafa, the vision of the Torah, the view of the Torah on goyim v'adam, and the human. Like as if there's no real obligation towards bettering that, like nothing halakhic, like we don't have any, it's not our thing. Like ein ra'ui to be mityaches to goyim. Ka'asher heru lahamivakrim she'ein b'dverihem kol mamash va'bikoret mefurechet mi'kara al yedei halachot mefurashot. He basically says, when I showed the critics, these critics who are saying, we have no obligation towards non-Jews, that there's nothing of mamash, there's no substance, and their critique is mufrechet, it's appalling from the outset by explicit halacha. Shenitztavenu lehityaches bechiba al kol ha'adam hanimtza b'tzelem. There you go, Herb. Right there's your answer. That we are commanded to treat with affection every adam, every human created b'tzelem, in the image. V'la'azor lo b'nyanei tzedakah v'chesed. So when I showed them Gittin, and I showed them the Yerushalmi, and I showed them the Maimonides, like I have lots of sources on darchei shalom. And that it's our response. We're nitztavenu. We're commanded. What did they come down to? Hey, no, it's not a big. It's only darchei shalom. V'lo mishurat hadin. They're not. It's not really the din. Like it's only darchei shalom. There's no real source. It's really actually quite appalling. And what he's talking about, if I read between the lines, is the more right-wing, kind of ultra-Orthodox community. Very inward-facing, very derogatory towards the outer world, and they're like, who takes darchei shalom seriously? I could say who takes Kavod HaTzibur seriously, and yet you're not letting women. Like, if we're gonna go down that path, there are a lot of things that I could begin to wonder. Well, why do we have to take this seriously? Why do we have to take that seriously? And what does he say? Yesh efo tzorech lefaresh et hamuvan ha'amiti shel musag darchei shalom she'eino bebchinat midat chasidut v'lo be'emtza'ei lahagen al atzmeinu ela novea me'etzem hamusar shel Torah hakadosh. If there's one thing you take away, it's this line. We must define the true concept of darchei shalom. It's not just a means of keeping Judaism, to keep Judaism safe from non-Jewish hatred. And it's not just midat chasidut, like some extra ethic of chasidut for the ascetic, for the pious. But it flows from the core ethical teachings of the Torah. And good for him. I love this quote. I think it matches, like I teach this and I'm like, how does anyone not see that that's what's in the Bavli? It's in the Torah about the ger. And then we get to the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Bavli, Rambam, Aruch HaShulchan. Meaning, I just brought you a smattering. No one's got. I could find many more sources that would align with that. Let's take a look at Rav Soloveitchik, and then I want to end with a story that I find particularly moving. It's already 3 years ago, almost exactly. The universal problems faced by humanity are also faced by the Jew: famine, disease, war, oppression, materialism, atheism, permissiveness, pollution of the environment. All of these are problems which history has imposed not only on the general community, but also on the covenantal community. We have no right to tell mankind that these problems are exclusively theirs. God has charged man, humans, with the task of fighting evil, of subduing the destructive forces of nature and transforming them into constructive forces. The Jew is a member of humanity. God's command to be fruitful and multiply, fill the land and conquer it, dominate the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every beast that walks the land is addressed equally to non-Jew and Jew. As human beings, Jews are duty-bound to contribute to the general welfare, regardless of the treatment accorded to them by society. Rav Soloveitchik. I'm going to end with something Rav Ari Hart, who was in Chicago, did in 22. It's one of the most, I mean, again, if anyone can think of ways of copying this is just unbelievable. It was Shemitah, 2022 was Shemitah, and I'll just read a snippet. We did it. $1.9 million of medical debt held by Illinois residents in need released. Shemitah year values made real. Now, of course, he's in America. There's no Shemitah in America. And he starts looking around, and we're going to see who he partners with. Partnerships deepened and strengthened. As part of our ongoing partnership between Bright Star Church, St. James Ministry, Chicago, Kogek, Skokie Valley, Agudat Yaakov, and Solu make an impact, 2 Church of God in Christ churches on the south side, and an Orthodox synagogue and community in Skokie on the north side, we came together to eliminate nearly $2 million of medical debt in partnership with RIP Medical Debt. We were inspired by our shared scriptures that call us to spend 1 year out of every 7 years working on eliminating harmful debt. In Hebrew, this is called the Shemitah year, the year of release. And this campaign was conducted during the Shemitah year, 5782, right? September 2021, September 2022. We eliminated debt for 2,327 individuals and families. May the Shemitah year be a source of release for millions of Americans trapped by medical debt, and for all those suffering under heavy burden, physical, emotional, financial, spiritual. May you find Shemitah year release and rest. Amen. Wow, what a powerful, beautiful manifestation of all the sources we saw, right? This idea of coming together, not just Jew versus non-Jew, not you do your thing and we'll do our thing and so on. It was a joint effort based on love of shared scriptures to try to mamash create some sort of darchei shalom, to ease the financial burden. And we all know that medical debt is crippling. It's one of the most crippling debts there are, and why people don't seek medical care and can't get medical care and then are crippled by their debt. Very beautiful initiative. Rabbi Hart is an Orthodox rabbi, just to be clear. But you know, sometimes it's going outside of our comfort zones to think about what we can accomplish in order to foster exactly what the Gemara says we have to do. Right? We're so used to really just being inward facing, and there's so much need. I don't want to take away from all of the chesed and all the tzedakah and all the chevra kadisha, and there's so many wonderful things that communities do. But the question is, can we also take a few steps to look outside at where the need is and whether we can contribute? I gave this talk to a group of philanthropists from Baltimore, women who came on a mission, and they were so excited by these sources because they said, look, we have to figure out how to divide our giving. Like, we're part of a federation, and you know, we do 2/3 within Baltimore and 1/3 outside of Baltimore. And like, this is just very refreshing and exciting to us that we have these texts that really encourage the kind of giving we're excited about and that we're trying to do, and so on. And so, you know, my bracha is that we all find the initiatives to bring a little shalom, a little tikkun olam. I can't ignore what's going on in Israel, that Idan Alexander was freed in really a miraculous moment, another hostage out, and hopefully he is tasting freedom for the first time in a long time, and we are all praying with him for his recovery and his re-entry into freedom. So I'm blessing all of us that we continue to pray for the release of the rest of the hostages. We continue to learn together. That's something we can do, and we think of little ways in which we can, little or big ways, depending on our ability to make our families, our communities, our world a little bit better. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. I hope to see you in the future in another series. It was wonderful, wonderful learning with you. I'll take a look at the chats. Thank you, Karen. That's interesting. Okay, thank you for your comments in the chats, and I'll see you. Have a good day or evening.